Trinity games are the best style of MMOs. But if you're not familiar with what a Trinity game is, or why a Trinity game is so different from other MMOs, you probably don't understand why it is. Hello everyone, welcome back to my rabbit hole of gaming and all things in the geekdom. In my video on tips for new Final Fantasy XIV players, I very briefly addressed the different roles that you'll play inside of a Trinity game. And if you're new to Trinity games, you probably don't know why it's important to know what those roles are and what they do. But first, let's look into what a Trinity game is. A Trinity style game is built around your Trinity, your tank, your healer, and your DPS. All are equal and necessary in their own way because they each cover and do different jobs. But all of them are needed in order to progress long term. If you're coming from games like Guild Wars 2, where you are tank, healer, and DPS by yourself, the system is probably confusing and possibly even annoying. Because whatever role you pick in a Trinity game, it just can't cover all three. But this system of a Trinity-style game forces a friendly community within the game, because this system is dependent upon teamwork, communication, and an understanding that you need other people in order to succeed. Whereas games like Guild Wars 2 is very solo-minded and you don't actually need to make friends in order to get farther in the game, because there isn't a lot of grouping, and when there is, you're really just kind of soloing around each other. Now, as in with any game or any game system, you're gonna have some jerks. That's unavoidable. But Trinity games, in all the years that I've played them, have had the friendliest and most helpful communities of all the games that I've ever played. It's in these games you'll have high-level players handing out and trading, potions and consumables to new players, or, people just jumping off of their mount mid-travel to help you in a fight because they can clearly see that you're struggling. It's friendly. As for the jerks, it's mostly people who are at endgame, they're high level, and they're criticizing or, telling you that you're playing your role wrong because you're not playing it the way that they play it in endgame. But the thing is, you're not at endgame. And if you're watching this video and you're new to Trinity games, you definitely won't understand why they tell you to play the way that you play, because you haven't even learned the basics of how to do your role yet. In-game systems for all games, including Trinity games, tend to switch from a more grouped mindset into a goal-oriented and achievement-oriented style. So the things you hear about doing for in-game don't help and really don't apply for the rest of the game. And in order to get good enough to make those adjustments for in-game, you first have to be able to play your role through the rest of the game and play it well. The reason why in-game is so different is because in-game is heavily reliant upon getting through as many things for a specific goal as you possibly can. And of course, everyone doesn't want to spend hours every single day to get through these things. So for instance, if someone wants a specific high-end mount, they have to do this specific raid so many times, and they don't want to spend an hour for each raid. So because of this, virtually everyone switches from playing their role into playing a DPS, just on that character that they were playing the role with before. And it turns it into a mixed role type thing. And they can pull this off because they're high enough and they're geared up enough and they're experienced enough that they can make that meld and they can make that switch. But this switch turns it into essentially a non-Trinity game. Thus, it is very different from the rest of the game. So making the switch just makes things faster for them. So while the things they tell you might be right for in-game, it doesn't mean that it's helpful for you right now. Now, what are the jobs of each of the roles in a Trinity game? Here they are in a nutshell, along with common misunderstood ideas surrounding those jobs, so that you can have a better understanding of which one you'd like to pick. If you're enjoying this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and help a poor lowly healer out. First, the tank. The tank's job is to pull and hold aggro. Seems easy until you have multiple mobs. Now, in bigger dungeons and things like it, you'll typically have a primary tank and a secondary tank. And the primary tank holds the aggro of the boss mob. And then the secondary tank pulls the aggro of all the add-ons so that they don't kill the healer. But their job is essentially to take a beating because they can. Them taking that beating keeps their healer and the DPS alive. This role gets the least scrutiny that I've seen. Doesn't mean it's easier, it just means that it's a bit more straightforward. But it does still get scrutinized. The most common ones is that it's the tank's fault when they lose aggro, or that all you need to do to hold aggro is spam certain abilities. First off, standing there spamming a taunt. Some games have specific taunt abilities and some don't, but the common thing among all of these games is that in order to hold taunt, a tank must be dealing damage. Because remember, you have 2 or 3 DPS who do way more damage than you hitting this mob. So regardless of the mechanic for actual taunt abilities, you have to be fighting to hold it against all of these DPS. And a lot of games also have their AI register healing in the same way that they do damage. The other thing is there's a lot of reasons why a tank can lose aggro. A lot of game mechanics force aggro changes so that your tank can't just sit there and hold a mob and you can easily kill this boss. They have it switch around so that there is some threat level. And it doesn't matter how good your tank is. And the most common reason I've seen a tank lose aggro is because their DPS unleashes everything they've got before the tank actually has aggro. And then it's just a fight for the tank to even get aggro back, much less hold it. But it's things like that that makes the tank mechanics something I don't even try and mess with. Now, the DPS. Their job is to kill things. And if you have multiple DPS, sometimes it's their job to go destroy this crystal that's holding up a shield across your boss mob or something. Some games have more crowd control centric DPS, but even then, they still do the most damage and their job is to take the mobs down. The scrutiny they get is warranted, but it also kind of isn't. It's a weird gray area for them. Just because this role seems to be the default for more reckless-minded people who just want to kill things. And those people are less group-minded. The ones I have seen are that DPS give no thought or planning to strategy, timing, or their group. Which, again, when you've got reckless players who don't care so much about the group, they just want to go hit things, yes, you have this problem a lot. The other thing is that all they do is hit things, so they're a super easy role to play. Which isn't true. There is an art and a finesse to being a really good DPS. As I said before, in dungeons and raids and certain things like that, you will have different things pop up that make it to where your boss mob is invulnerable. And your tank is still holding the boss mob because your boss mob is still fighting and attacking and dealing damage. And your healer still has to keep your tank up, which leaves you, the DPS, on the outskirts as the only one who can get up, go to this thing and destroy it so that you can get back to killing your boss. And this is a very common thing among higher level places. So they actually do a lot, and a lot falls on their shoulders. I've even seen some good DPS go so far as to take aggro off of certain mobs attacking their healer because their tank wasn't able to do it at that moment, and kite these mobs to stay alive to make sure that the healer stayed alive too. And on the point of them being reckless, this is people who either don't care too much about playing correctly, they don't know how to play correctly, or they just aren't paying attention. But that's a very person-based thing. Now, the healer. As a healer, I will tell you that a lot of times it's a lose-lose situation being a healer. I've seen more scrutiny and pressure put on healers than I've seen any of the other roles be under. It's even commonly joked that if you're a healer and you're doing your job right, it's your fault when anything goes wrong, and if you're playing a healer and you do your job wrong, it's your fault when anything goes wrong. So beware. As a healer, your job is to keep your group alive. The scrutinies they get are that healers have this high capability of DPS, and so they should be helping to kill the mobs, and killing the mobs should be their primary focus, and then healing should be their secondary. And the other one is that they have no DPS capabilities, and so they shouldn't even waste their mana trying to help. Both are wrong. Addressing the first point, killing isn't your job. If you never cast an attack spell, you have not done your job wrong. Your responsibility as a healer is to heal and keep your group alive. The DPS is in charge of the killing. That doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't help them with it when you are literally just standing there. As a healer, my job is to heal. But once you're good at that job, you'll end up finding that there are certain lulls of inactivity to where your group isn't in any threat, you have good mana, you don't need to be healing. I mean, you can sit there just spamming your heals over and over again, but it's pointless. And it really could be served doing something else. And there's no excuse for just standing there. And you'll learn as time goes on when you're able to mix your healing and your fighting together. Because some fights demand all of your attention beyond healing, but a lot of fights don't. A lot of fights, it's very open for you to just cast a few heals when they're needed, and then to jump in and help kill the mob. Even if it's tiny amounts of damage, it's still better than nothing. But your responsibility and your job is to heal your group and keep them alive. If that's a struggle for you, you should never even think about trying to attack anything. But if it isn't a struggle for you and you're finding it's comfortable to keep your group alive, you can help attack in between heals. That, in a nutshell, is what the roles in a Trinity game are. And they make a Trinity game what it is. And the community it brings can be really cool. You can even get famous in your job. When I was playing EQ2 a whole lot, I had specific guilds who had me on their friends list so that when they did dungeons or they did raids and they needed a cleric and their guildmates weren't available, they would always message me first to make sure that I was available so that I could help them with it, which is pretty cool. Comment down below which role is your favorite and why.